Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Whitfield Report Thursday edition. I am your host, Sam Whitfield, recording here live from NGC Studios, or rather, I'm not recording live, I'm recording in the past, present, future hour. I'm actually recording this on Tuesday night before I leave for my vacation to North Carolina. I made a video on the YouTube channel kind of detailing that I was leaving for North Carolina on Wednesday. So if you're hearing this on Thursday, that's where I am right now. But I wanted to go ahead and pre-record this short podcast. And it is going to be relatively short this week for the audio podcast because I have two shows I have to pre-record. I have this one, the audio podcast, which I'm recording right now on Tuesday evening, and then I have the hour-long Saturday show, which I'm going to pre-record and then premiere on YouTube right after I finish this one, and that one is going to be more oriented towards some pop culture stuff just in general. And like I said this is going to be a shortened episode. I realized that last week's audio podcast episode was over an hour long, so it wasn't super lengthy, but this one, may only be a half an hour. But 2 weeks ago on the audio podcast, I discussed what my problems with libertarianism in general are. Kind of how the libertarian movement has kind of descended more or less from being small government to completely anarchist in this newer generation, and how that is not effective at all. Last week on the Thursday / Friday / what ended up being the Saturday podcast, I talked a lot about what I define as, conservatarianism, which is kind of a hybrid of conservative and libertarian principles. I defined what that ideology was and why I believe in that hybrid and why I invite other people to join in on it with me too. So this week, I want to focus on the culture war and why it's important for conservatives and libertarians, especially more, I don't want to say anarchists, but more traditional libertarians to join in on the fight of the culture war, why it's important. This is a subject that I've talked about regularly on my show for years and years and years. It was a staple of the Whitfield analysis, which is my old show, my really old show, which, dated from 2008 all the way up to, 2015, 2016, basically. And then when I relaunched the podcast, I took a little bit of a break there, and then I relaunched the podcast as the Whitfield Report, for the past 2 years. The culture war is something that has also been important, but the importance of the culture war has changed in some ways for me, and in many ways it's stayed the same, and I'll explain how it's changed and how it's stayed the same, but why it's important for us to get involved culturally nonetheless. So I want to give you a perfect example of just why it's important in general. And I want to go back to the example of YaleCon Memphis, which, as I mentioned before, was very enjoyable to just, hang out and be with some of my fellow politicos, even though, I disagreed with, a fair, portion of the libertarian purists there. I still enjoyed it. I don't want people getting the impression that I didn't enjoy my time there, because I did. But one of the things I noticed at YaleCon, and it's something I've noticed with conservative conventions I've attended in the past too, such as such as the Western Conservative Summit in Denver, which I've attended in years past as well. When you get people who are politically minded, it's awesome to get people who are politically minded, even if they're on different sides of the aisle together, to talk policy and just different ideas about economics and political philosophies. All of that is pretty good. Like I can get together with a group of friends who are conservative and talk about which economic policies I think are good, or which laws I think are good, or basically anything political. When you get a group of people who are politically oriented together, it works well. However, and I'm not necessarily bashing anyone in particular for this, because this is a habit that I was into for a while, and then I kind of snapped out of it. Talking politics and the importance of policies and whatnot is great when you're talking to your fellow politicos, because you can go really in depth with them, and you're communicating on like a whole different level, and it's unique. But the problem, or I should say not so much a problem, but the simple fact of the matter is, a lot of people in their day-to-day life don't focus on politics all that much. Most people are just, they're either consumed with the culture and stuff going on in sports and media and entertainment, and their personal lives, or they're consumed with just working or trying to put food on the table, or they're focused on something else generally that isn't focused on politics. And even if, let's say, people do like watch the news, they're watching it they're watching it tangentially, and they're probably not looking at like multiple news sources. Now, Rush Limbaugh coined the term low information voters, which I have to say is actually a pretty appropriate term. People have criticized Rush to mean that like he's calling people stupid, which wasn't the case at all. When Rush came up with that term, what he was saying was that the general populace tends to make decisions based on relatively few facts or whatnot regarding politics because they're consumed with their own lives outside of politics. And so they don't pay attention. And they don't have as much information as the politically inclined. Right? And I mean, there's been a whole debate on whether, it's good that people are, not so politically obsessed in general or bad. I will say this. I wish that more of the general populace were interested in politics. And I wish that people are more educated on politics, because I think if people actually understood what was going on in general, especially with the left, they wouldn't be so, they wouldn't be so gung ho just to buy into the, Democrat left narrative. They would maybe look at things more objectively, and then, more likely, if people were more educated in general on politics and, whatnot, they would probably make more conservative or just more liberty-oriented, voting decisions in general. And look, I know that there's, a whole argument to be made that a lot of that is based on, access to education and access to, information and whatnot, which, by the way, the access to information part is kind of an invalid point in this day and age. Granted, not everyone owns a computer, but most people, the vast majority of people, while they might not own a full-blown computer, definitely own like a smartphone or a tablet these days. And so the access to information is there. We can decide on, access to education and whatnot. But, let's assume for a sec, all things being equal, if people were just more educated on politics in general, they would probably make more liberty-oriented decisions. With that being said, politics is just not that interesting to most people, in a day-to-day, situation, compared to like music or, pop culture or, stuff like that. And like, even I admit, like, I'm like one of those weird people that, like, I'm into politics and talking politics. There are people out me like there, but I can certainly, like, I also like sports and entertainment, and yeah, like, that stuff is a lot more fun to talk about, right? And, like music and film and whatnot, that stuff is more fun. Well, the left, very early on, knew that, or I should say the American left, very early on, knew that they needed to get into media and pop culture, right? After World War II, especially, there was a group called the Frankfurt School, which was basically, after World War II, they got disenfranchised with the idea of, democracy. They started adapting more Marxist theory, and they decided to come to the United States. But they also knew that the United States and the people of the United States would not respond well to an attempted coup, similar to what happened in Russia, right? Communism in Russia was able to be, dis- installed through force. But in America, that wasn't going to work here. So, in essence, and I'm actually going to play a clip from Andrew Breitbart about this because he puts it so eloquently. But the American left, early on, decided that they needed to, they figured out how to infiltrate media and pop culture and subtly, transmit messages through the media. And while conservatives were focused on policy outright, the American left was focused on, music and pop culture and entertainment. And it was, I would argue, like around the mid to late 60s when things really started to change, and we saw, cultural norms, in terms of entertainment shift more left wing. People were experimenting more. People were, getting sick of Vietnam. There was a lot more, drug use. Eastern philosophy was coming in to American culture. So there was a cultural shift left. The right, for whatever reason, with maybe the exception of a few, actors and directors, although very few, and I realize I'm oversimplifying this, but the right and I guess the conservatives and the libertarians, the Barry Goldwaters and the William F. Buckleys, they were focused on policy and, economics and nerd stuff, basically, in air quotes. And, didn't see how pop culture was relevant. But the left did, and I mean, the earliest example I can think of, and like now JFK would not even be considered left. He would actually be considered conservative. So he's not a good example, but like, necessarily of the modern left, but right, JFK and, Jackie and the Kennedy family, they were more or less, I would argue, at least in terms of contemporary America, the first, celebrity presidential family, right? It was called Camelot. The Kennedys were often very portrayed as, glamorous, and everyone kind of wanted to be like them. Lots of men wore their hair like Jack did. That was a style in the 60s. Lots of women wore a lot of the same types of wardrobe styles that Jackie O wore. And in fact, my grandmother has a few, dresses similar to that style. Granted, they look, dated now, but the Kennedys were very influential in terms of style. The Clintons too in the 90s, like Bill Clinton or not, and let's take away the blue dress scandal and everything. Prior to that, Bill Clinton gained massive cultural appeal because he could play the saxophone, and he was a cool cat, and he was a smooth talker, and people wanted to hang out with him and drink beers. Some people would even joke that Bill Clinton was technically the first black president, not necessarily as a racial thing, but just because he seemed down and hip and cool, like one of the brothers. I would even argue that, like, Reagan had the appeal of being an actor, and Bush. I wouldn't say that W. Bush's election was necessarily due to popularity. A lot of people, we still don't know, what exactly happened in 2000. That election will always remain a mystery, probably forever. But I do remember, before hating Bush became cool during the post 9/11 era. I do remember, when I was a very young kid, but I do remember, my dad and some of the neighbors saying things like, well, W, he might be a little country, but he seems to be like a cool president to drink beers with. Obama, the Obama presidency was very, Obama's entire campaign was basically based on, he's the cool, hip candidate. Not only is he the first, viable African American president, but he's cool, he's coiffed, he's an eloquent speaker. He knows how to sing, Al Green songs and, Motown, and he can dance, and there's just an oozing of coolness. And I was a teenager during Obama's election, or that whole presidential campaign of 2008, and I was one of those nerds even at an early age where I liked looking at things like voting records and whatnot. And now I'm getting into the origin of the show a little bit for those who don't know. But the entire reason why I started podcasting actually was because I remember looking at and then Junior Senator Obama's voting record, and I think it was like something out of like 1,500, proposals or something, which isn't a lot in a congressional session, actually. He only voted on maybe 200, and then the rest were left blank, and, it didn't really seem like, although his rhetoric was, impressive as far as what he was saying, it seemed like his voting record and his policy, positions in actuality were, weren't that good, or, in the case of his voting record, were also more or less non-existent. So me being the political-minded nerd that I, am, I brought that up to a couple of my classmates, and I was like in 8th grade, and I had never said anything about Obama being, black, but all I had said was, I don't know if this guy has the right, prerequisites based on his, lack of political experience and political merits to be president. That's all I said. What I realize now is that a lot of my friends at the time, and a lot of them are probably still like this, I was speaking a foreign language to them when I was talking about policy and voting records and whatnot. All they heard was, I'm not sure if Obama was qualified to be president, and they automatically, accused me of maybe having some racist tendencies or, possibly being discriminatory towards Obama, because he had African American, even though I had said nothing of the sort. But this trend of kind of Obama was the guy, and anyone who questioned him was a racist. That was back in 2008, and those were I would argue, the very early seeds of kind of the social justice culture that we have now. It was nowhere near as bad now. But even so, the fact that I merely questioned Obama's voting record and I was a racist, that doesn't seem right. So I essentially at the time decided to, start a podcast, or start an internet radio show at the time, which would eventually merge into a podcast, which would eventually merge into this podcast you're hearing right now, because I simply wanted to educate my fellow millennials about, current events and politics and whatnot. And, for a while it went pretty well, but then like around my junior and senior, then around like my, the latter part of my sophomore into junior year, I realized I was being, way too political in terms of terms and policies. And I wasn't really breaking down things well enough for, my non-political friends out there. I wasn't explaining myself very well. And that's because, like most politicos, I hadn't really considered, bringing pop culture into the whole thing. Movies, video games, and, like sports, those were all things that, of course, I liked as, teenager. But, I wasn't really aware that it was the culture that the left controlled, and the culture was why, Obama was the hip and cool president. Andrew Breitbart, who had started Breitbart.com in 2011, back then it was big government, big, it was big journalism, big government, and big Hollywood. I think that was one of them. But I know big Hollywood for sure was one of them. And big Hollywood was the one I started following, and that was real when I started to realize how much, politics was downstream from culture, as Andrew Breitbart was so fondly famous for saying. So I'm actually going to now play for you an excerpt of Andrew Breitbart talking about the importance of politics being downstream from culture. So this is Andrew Breitbart, and on the subject, enjoy.
Mark Twain. whatever happened to the founding fathers? I mean, in 2.5 years I've taken a degree that's American Studies. A degree I chose because I went up to a bunch of sorority girls and said, I'm late for choosing my major. Will you choose my major for me? They said American Studies. That's an aside. But in 2.5 years of that, I remember upon graduating thinking to myself, who's Herbert Marcuse, Theodore Adorno, Antonio Gramsci, this guy named Horkheimer, Eric Fromm, I believe, all these crazy names. And that's not like Emerson or Thoreau or Emily Dickinson. What are these crazy names? And there are people out there on the internet who have conspiracy theories, right? I mean, Ron Paul has it fits into that sort of paradigm, I would say, on certain things. They're all over the place, but I have one firm conspiracy theory, and that is that the communists did win, at least in the cultural institutions, and that Antonio Gramsci, who understood America, and Theodore Adorno, who understood America, they realized that most other countries were susceptible to a Marxist-Leninist revolution, but America wasn't, because we had this strong middle class, and everybody got off the boat and with a nickel in their pocket and felt that they could rise through this society that was fluid. There weren't firm class distinctions. And so those people that came here with the zeal, the communist zeal, at a time when communism hadn't been tried, tested, and failed, found that America wasn't susceptible to it. And these guys came over here. They fled Nazi Germany, and they fled Mussolini's Italy, and came here. And this is what I read this in a New York Times article, and I couldn't believe it. It talked about how Theodore Adorno, these are obscure names, but if you start Googling them and you start realizing these guys were the architects of our doom, and they're the people that we're fighting right now. And Adorno was living right where I lived when my first son, Samson, was born in 1999. I lived at 27th in Arizona, and he lived up on 26th Street, Santa Monica, maybe about a quarter of a mile away. To describe the area, Santa Monica, palm trees, permanently 70 degrees, and he was there in the late 1940s and the 1950s. And in the New York Times, they described him, saying that he got there from Nazi Germany, and he immediately became chronically depressed because everybody was so cheerful and relentlessly cheerful, and that they were so caught up in consumerism. It was like he was depressed that they weren't nihilists like he was. Like, people, like wanting to radically transform society. People are like, radically transform society? Are you kidding me? Look at that Marilyn Monroe. She's fantastic. And these guys decided to socially engineer our culture. And what they realized is that we weren't susceptible to the arguments against capitalism, because everybody was running around buying stuff, and everybody was built, everybody accepted the premise of upward mobility. Everybody that was on the assembly line thought, I'm going to invent the widget that's going to make it so that we can have twice the production in an hour. So he was frustrated by that. And they figured out that the way to attack America was to not go after after the economic pillar of American society. It was to go after the cultural pillar of American society.
Alrighty, so as you could probably tell by that clip I just played of Breitbart, that was from back in 2011, and this was when smartphone and cell phone recordings were just starting to get good, but they weren't quite as good as they are now. They were nowhere near as good as they are now in 2019. But nonetheless, Andrew did a terrific job of explaining basically, how and why the cultural Marxists took over Hollywood. Now, he goes on to, emphasize this more in his book, Righteous Indignation. Excuse Me While I Save the World. That's the title of his book. I'll probably link it here in the description for you guys to read, or you can get it on Audible. One of those two. It's very much worth the read because he does explain why the culture war matters. Culture's how we got Obama for 8 years. That's why, even though conservative and libertarian principles are better policy-wise, perhaps, they didn't mean much in 2008, and they didn't mean much in 2012. Now, obviously, there were problems in 2012 because Mitt Romney was, in hindsight, he was not that strong of a candidate. That's the other thing, though, with culture. Well, Obama looked and was portrayed by the media, which is very left, to be to be cool and suave and, caring guy. Both, well, more so Mitt Romney, but John McCain to a certain extent too. John McCain, let's face it, in 2008 wasn't going to win because he was seen as a war hawk, which he is, and people were afraid. People were just, I think, sick and tired of kind of the war regime of the Bushes, which I can't really blame them now in hindsight, but Obama wasn't that much better in hindsight either, as it turns out, in that regard at all, actually. But in terms of Mitt Romney, Mitt Romney was portrayed by the media, which was left as, being the guy who tied his dog to the roof. I remember that being a, popular media meme kind of in 2012. And also he had, he had files with qualified women in his company, which, there's nothing wrong with qualified candidates who are female, but remember the media took that and turned that into Mitt Romney has a binder full of women, and the memes that resulted because of that. Basically, the left for a long period of time was successful because they had television, they had the movies, they had music, they had basically all mass media to really help influence popular culture. And then the internet came around, and they were pretty handy about using social media and whatnot too, and blogging and whatnot in its early days. And part of that was because of the establishment GOP was just so terrible at it. In fact, if one were to go back and listen to my old shows, that was one of the things I would constantly bitch about on air, was how conservatives just sucked at using the internet, but how Andrew Breitbart and Rush Limbaugh were one of the few conservative voices at the time who knew the relevancy and power of the internet. Andrew Breitbart, especially, with what ended up being Breitbart News during his tenure before his untimely death. Right. So for a long time, the right kind of cultural libertarians were really getting beaten down in terms of winning because of the culture war. And then things really changed with Donald Trump because, right, the thing about the Democrats using, mass media and popularity to craft their candidates, right? It worked for Obama, but it also worked for Trump in kind of reverse, right? Now, if you're listening to this in, say, the year like 2030 or 2035, I don't know why you would be listening to this then in the future, but let's say you are. Hello, future listeners. Um, a lot of you who are younger might not, in fact, even in 2019, the a lot of kids who are probably under the age of like, I would say 15. Well, probably more like, I'm going to say 13. Probably kids under the age of like 13, 14. At this point, they probably don't remember that or even, know at this point that before becoming a political candidate, Donald Trump was a big, he was a celebrity. He was a tabloid celebrity for much of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And then, a lot of people know him because of the Apprentice. So Trump had star power and he had star appeal. He also used to be a former Democrat. And, right, this was one of the interesting things because one of the criticisms of Obama, and I was one of these people, was that he wasn't qualified politically to run for office at the time because he had very little experience, right? But they used, we need someone with, fresh experience who doesn't have much. We need an outsider. And that was Obama to them, supposedly, right? Supposedly he was the outsider. I'm not sure how much in reality he actually was an outsider, but that was what they were saying, right? So the GOP, I realized that the GOP was very divided amongst Trump, but and I wasn't the biggest fan of Trump really until like it came down between him and Ted Cruz, and then I just knew that that Trump was going to be the one. But from the beginning of Trump's presidential run, I was talking to one of, it's actually not just one of, but several early Trump supporters. And there were two things that they brought up consistently, right? One in regards to, what do you like about Trump? That they often brought up the fact that he was a businessman and he was an entrepreneur, and that was, you know, he was a pop culture figure, and all of those things would have made him perfect to run for president, right? And you know, then the second thing was, well, he literally has no experience, unlike Obama. And they would always say, in response, that Obama had, next to no political experience, and he got into office. And Obama never even had like business experience or experience in private industry at all, or being an entrepreneur. So their whole thing was the no, the no political experience rule wasn't going to fly, right? Also, Trump was, he was bold, he was controversial, he was basically, he was both metaphorically and, he was both figuratively, metaphorically, and literally a WWE star at one point, right? and political correctness was getting really bad around during the Obama years, especially after, the 2012 election with the whole Trayvon Martin thing, which my friend uh, Ray from Eye on the Empire brought up earlier this week, actually, on one of his podcasts, right? And who controls the media? It's a very fascinating episode. And by the way, I don't want to digress too much, but again, if you're not subscribed to Eye on the Empire already, go check out Ray's podcast. It's great. It's actually called Eye on 2020, but anyway, I digress. Basically, after Trayvon Martin and that whole thing, the social justice warriors and the Occupy Wall Street movement and everything just really got out of hand. And so Trump's appeal was he's a businessman. He's an alpha male. He's a billionaire. You know, he had a brand. He had power. He wasn't just a political nerd like Jeb exclamation point. Or Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio. Well, I mean, the whole thing with Jeb was unlikable because he was a Bush, and let's be honest. But Trump was also seen as an outsider in 2016, where Obama was seen as an outsider. Obama was seen as an outsider in 2008. Trump was seen as an outsider in 2016, right? 8 years later. In a way, the MAGA movement and the conservatives hijacked, very successfully, I might add, the left's playbook for cultural relevance, reworked a bit, and like Trump babes, right? Bikini clad, patriotic models, on Instagram, showing support for Trump. I had one of them on my show post-election, right? Like that type of thing or not, it was effective, right? Conservatives were no longer seen as prudes. Meme magic and whatnot was, a thing that was useful. Now, true, the left was like trying to say that like all the memes were racist and whatnot, like, Pepe the Frog and whatnot, which while there were some racist depictions that were on the internet, like blatantly racist, you really had to dig far to find them. But yet the left was, pretending like they were out there all the time. Part of the reason for that, too, was, Trump was winning bigly because of memes, because of, pop culture. And I mean, I know win bigly is one of his phrases, but he won because he was a pop culture icon, partially, and because Hillary Clinton was so hated, right? I was one of the people who said in 2015 that I would vote for whoever the candidate was in the Republican Party because we would lose to Hillary Clinton. And I knew that Hillary Clinton was going to hijack the DNC from the beginning and, just crown herself as the nominee. I knew that was going to happen. And believe it or not, I think Trump was the only one who could have, successfully beaten her because Trump outcooled Hillary Clinton. Now, while Trump hasn't been a perfect president, he's been better, as I explained somewhat last week, than a lot of people initially thought, right? So Trump's presidency is essentially an example of, the culture war kind of turning in our favor, right? For those of us who are conservative. And I mean, I know there are people, more libertarians here who don't like Trump, but right, the culture war shifted to our side a little bit more with Trump's election, like him or not, right? Well, now the left is fighting back. They're trying to, censor us through Facebook, through YouTube, uh, trying to say that, like, they're being Facebook and Twitter and, YouTube and all the big social media platforms are all being very vague with what they're calling, air quotes, hate speech policy, right? And granted, some of the censorship happens with the left, too, but it happens a lot more with conservative and libertarian, circles, right? The left invented the phrase alt-right, too. Or rather, Richard Spencer, fully coined the term alt-right. And, like, the left took a very, like, fringe radical group and blew them, which was the alt-right, and blew them up to try and represent every conservative, right? That's why Richard Spencer, is out there, and that's why Owen Benjamin, is out there. Like, the left does try and, make, like, these alt-right figures, try and make, the left loves to try and make, like, these fringe radicals look like the rest of us, and that's simply not true. So, I mean, the culture war is heating back up, but it's imperative that we, keep fighting the culture war here, in the conservative libertarian movement, because, like or not, pop culture is, it's important. So, how do we do that? Well, I've started a podcast. Ray has started a podcast just by having conversations, whether it be about politics, and even sometimes just having, like, casual conversations on your podcast with guests about, like, movies and whatnot. That's a good way. But also, we need, like, more creative people. We need people who are writing fiction, books and novels. We need people. We need libertarian, gamers and game creators, and we need, liberty-oriented people who are interested in screenwriting and whatnot, which I happen to be. I'm not sure if I'm going to, produce anything major, but we need more creative people in the liberty movement, because that's going to be important going forward, for the culture war. You bet your butt it's going to be. So anyway, I realize I've been a little rambly this episode. Like I said, I'm trying to do 2 episodes tonight, for the week while I'm on vacation, just because I love you guys so much, and I really do appreciate everyone who listens to the podcast here on the audio feed, whether that be through Apple Podcasts, through Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever. I really appreciate you guys. I also really appreciate, the people who watch the YouTube, live streams and subscribe to the Whitfield Report channel on YouTube, and, watch the live stream podcasts there, which are also available on, the audio feed as well. And I doubly love people who are subscribed to both mediums, who enjoy both the audio podcast and the YouTube channel and the video content as well. You guys are the ultra savages in Sam's Savages, and I really appreciate you guys. So I wanted to, treat you guys to some special episodes while I'm gone this week. Like I said, I'm sorry I can't do these live. Maybe I'll try and do like some streaming and some recording from North Carolina if the signal, and if I get good Wi-Fi in the Airbnb, I will try to provide some sort of content while I'm on the road and while I'm on vacation. But I can't promise you anything, so these shows are my gift to you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so very much for listening to the podcast. If you feel like supporting us, please feel free to go to paypal.me/Whitfield Pod. You can donate on streamlabs.com/the Whitfield Report for one-time donations. Or if you want to contribute to the show monthly, you can go to anchor.fm/Whitfield Report and subscribe for $1.99 a month, $4.99 a month, or $9.99 a month if you choose to support it. I will have the Patreon page back up and running here. I know I say that like every month. Once I get back from vacation, I really am going to dive deep and get that all configured again for you guys. But like I said, folks, in the meantime, I'm just so thankful for everyone who supports the podcast and thankful to our sponsors for making the show, for supporting us as well. And folks, I just want to thank you very much for listening. Wherever you are in the past, present, future hour, God bless, God save this great nation, God, freedom, legacy, in that order. And I will see you guys when I come back from vacation, if you're listening. And if you feel like, again, I'll have a live, I'll have a pre-recorded show for the YouTube audience on Saturday night, which will also be available on Sunday night. So, this is one of two shows this week. I hope you enjoy them both. I've worked hard on both of them. So, like I said, good night, or I should say, good day or good night, wherever you are in the past, present, future hour. God bless, and God, freedom, legacy, in that order. I'll see you live when I get back. Bye for now, and God bless.